Good morning, and welcome to the Transitional Kindergarten Webcast, Transforming Early Learning to Support a P-12 Continuum. I am Debra McMannis, Director at the California Department of Education, Early Education and Support Division. We are pleased to present this webcast in collaboration with the Sacramento County Office of Education to highlight new online modules that will soon be released by the California Department of Education for TK teachers and administrators. Funded by the California Legislature in the Budget Act of 2014, the professional learning modules strengthen and enhance knowledge of the California preschool learning foundations for teachers, instructional leaders, site district, and county office of education administrators. It is the intent of the legislature that TK curriculum be aligned to the California preschool learning foundations developed by the California Department of Education, also known as CDE. This TK webcast will focus on the important role of TK teachers and administrators as they support young children for success in later grades. Throughout the webcast, we will share highlights of publications and resources that have been developed by the CDE. TK teachers have the unique opportunity to utilize these research-based resources to provide high-quality learning environments that are age and developmentally appropriate. Educators have a tremendous opportunity to positively impact the learning trajectory of every student. We have an exceptional list of speakers appearing in this webcast who will share valuable information about how teachers and administrators can effectively promote high-quality teaching and learning experiences for TK students. Today's webcast agenda includes an overview of the new online TK professional learning modules presented by Dr. Nancy Herota and Andrea Willis. Dr. Ross Thompson will highlight the critical role of TK teachers in supporting children's social emotional development. Dr. Hallie Yopp will discuss the essential roles of language development and foundational skills for reading success in later grades. I will be back to provide an overview of how school districts can support the P-12 continuum by sharing highlights of funding opportunities through the Every Student Succeeds Act to support early learning. And finally, Dr. Natalie Woods-Andrews will provide closing remarks. As you're watching the webcast, please sign in to the web chat to submit your questions and receive other information that will be posted within the chat. This webcast will be archived and announcements will be made when it is available for later viewing. And now, Glen Thomas and Marilyn Astore will explain the module development process and more about the webcast agenda.
Thank you, Debra. Marilyn and I have the pleasure of working with the team at CDE and Sacramento County Office of Education to support the development of 10 online professional learning modules that you will learn about today. I would like to share with you the process that was developed to gather feedback on the development of these modules. Last year, a statewide survey was disseminated to school districts and county offices of education to gather initial input on core content that should be included in these modules. The findings from almost 1,000 responses were reviewed. In addition, to support the development of these online TK modules, CDE convened the Transitional Kindergarten Professional Learning Steering Committee, comprised of key stakeholders throughout California. We had representatives from key associations and agencies throughout the state, including district administrators and a TK teacher. Marilyn and I facilitated the TK Steering Committee meetings that were held quarterly over the past 2 years. TK Steering Committee members provided valuable feedback on the topic areas and content and made recommendations regarding the researcher presentation for these online modules.
Thank you, Glen. The development of the online modules was led by an extensive team at the Sacramento County Office of Education. Dr. Nancy Herota, Dr. Natalie Woods-Andrews and Stacy Sewell were the project leads. The Curriculum and Instruction Department and other early learning experts made up the writing team. The content of the modules was reviewed by TK teachers for additional input, and the Internet Media Services Department produced the 10 online modules. The project leads also worked with Iron Mountain Films to film TK classrooms, interviews with TK teachers and administrators and nationally recognized researchers. Those video clips are embedded within each of the modules. These modules focus on the alignment between the preschool learning foundations and the kindergarten standards and include a wide range of CDE publications and other resources to support teachers and administrators to implement effective approaches in the areas of environment, instruction, and assessment. In just a moment, Dr. Nancy Herota and Andrea Willis will provide an overview of the TK online professional learning modules for TK teachers and administrators.
I am pleased to share with you information regarding new online transitional kindergarten professional learning modules that will soon be released by the California Department of Education. 10 online modules have been developed for transitional kindergarten teachers and administrators. These online modules cover a variety of topics that include an overview for California school administrators. There are 3 modules focused on social emotional development and 1 module on English language development. In addition, there are 5 modules focused on language and literacy and mathematics. 3 modules focused on language and literacy include the integrated nature of language and literacy, language development, and foundational skills for reading. And in the area of mathematics, we have modules that focus on geometry and number sense. These modules provide an overview of CDE resources to support TK classrooms. Each module takes approximately 3 hours to complete. They are intended for teachers and administrators to complete at their own pace or to review together as part of a professional learning community. The online modules focus on developmentally appropriate practice in the areas of environment, instruction, and assessment. These online modules are based on the preschool learning foundations and the alignment to the kindergarten standards. The online modules are interactive with an overview of the content area, reading assignments, video clips, and reflections for teachers and administrators that are embedded throughout each module. The videos include footage of TK classrooms that illustrate examples of instructional strategies and interviews with TK teachers and administrators. In addition, video footage of interviews with nationally recognized researchers in early childhood are embedded throughout each module. Researchers who contributed to the development of these online TK modules include Dr. Douglas Clements on early mathematics, Dr. Linda Espinosa on English language development and dual language learners, Dr. Judith Schickadance on language development, Dr. Ross Thompson on social emotional development, and Dr. Hallie Yopp on language and literacy development in young learners. In addition to the interview clips of researchers that are embedded within each module, there are also standalone presentations conducted by these researchers that can be viewed separately from these modules. These standalone presentations that supplement the modules will be excellent resources for professional learning. Each module highlights key resources to support TK classrooms, beginning with the preschool learning foundations and curriculum framework. Some of the other key documents include the California Standards for Kindergarten, transitional kindergarten chapters in the English Language Arts, English Language Development Framework, and Mathematics Framework, the Alignment Document, the Transitional Kindergarten Implementation Guide, and Desired Results Developmental Profile. These modules provide an overview of the California Preschool Learning Foundations and Framework to support developmentally appropriate teaching and learning approaches. The foundations are aligned with the kindergarten standards and include 9 domains. The foundations include knowledge and skills that young children typically exhibit at around 48 and 60 months of age when engaged in a high-quality early learning program. There are also 3 volumes of the California Preschool Curriculum Framework, which are companion documents to the foundations. The framework provides information on teaching and learning approaches in an early learning program. The curriculum framework provides strategies that focus on high-quality learning environments, teaching strategies, and family engagement. TK teachers have the option of registering for continuing education units through the University of California, Davis Extension for these online TK modules. Please note that there are funds available for TK teachers to receive reimbursement to cover the cost of these courses through the California TK Stipend Program administered by the local planning council in each county. I will now turn it over to Andrea Willis, who will provide an overview of the website to access these online TK modules.
Thank you. Today I'm going to give you a sneak preview of the online Transitional Kindergarten Professional Learning Series, which is expected to be released this summer. The site is not yet live, so today we'll be visiting the beta or the test version of the site. As we do our tour today, I'm going to show you a sampling of pages and features that our team is especially proud of. Here on the home page, you'll notice that the site offers online TK professional learning for both teachers and administrators. For TK teachers, we have professional learning modules about research-based approaches to teaching and learning. And for administrators, we have resources and information to support TK teachers and programs. On the home page, you'll notice the prominent register button. Registration is required, and it enables us to track participants' progress through the courses so they know where they left off in their studies. And because we're tracking people's completion of the courses, we're able to offer the optional continuing education units. So let's go ahead and log in. Since I already have an account, I'm going to select the Login button in the top right corner of the page. After I log in, I arrive to what's called the dashboard page. Here, all 4 courses will ultimately be posted. Since we're on the test site today, we're only seeing the first 2 courses, with 2 more coming soon. This is also the place where you'll find the researcher presentations that Nancy mentioned. To learn about the content of each course, you'd simply click on the course descriptions link in the top right corner. Let's take a peek at the first course, which is called Course 1, an overview of transitional kindergarten for California school administrators. Let's think of this as the home page for the course. This is the place where individuals will access all of the course content for this specific course. First, I'll select the instructions link here in the activity menu section of the page. This page provides some helpful tips about how to use the course, including information about its accessibility features, how to navigate the site, etc. One thing that was important to our team was that we want the site to be extremely user-friendly. We're big fans of making sure that our participants can easily navigate through the website, find what they need, and basically do what they need to do easily. So with this in mind, we've included a big blue button in the top right corner of each of the course pages. If you select that button, you'll go to the next page of your course. So let's go to the first lesson. Here we are on the video lesson for Part 1 Introduction. The main thing we want participants to do on this type of page is to watch the video. So let's go ahead and take a really quick peek at the first video so you can get a sense of what they look like.
Welcome to the online professional learning module entitled An Overview of Transitional Kindergarten for California School Administrators. This module is part of the Transitional Kindergarten Professional Learning Series and is made available to you by the California Department of Education's Early Education and Support Division. Part 1. Introduction.
In this module, an overview of transitional kindergarten
Our next step, as you can probably guess, is to select the Go to Next Lesson button. So now we're on Video Lesson Part 2, which is all about legislation and policy for TK. The main feature that I want to point out on this page is the transcript. A major priority for us on this project was to ensure that the site and the courses are highly accessible to people with disabilities. With this in mind, we've done many things, including the creation of approximately 150 collated transcripts. I'll show you a sample of one collated transcript by selecting the Transcript button. Here you will notice that we've taken all of the spoken text from the video and we've added describer notes in green. Those describer notes explain the key information that shows on screen but that is not spoken in the videos. Now let's go to the next lesson. On this page, I want to point out one design feature that I'm especially pleased with. One of the things that our writers wanted to do was to provide our participants with exposure to various key resources related to TK. With this in mind, we have integrated assignments into the videos. Those assignments ask the participant to pause the video and go to specific resources to complete certain tasks. Links to these resources can be found below the video. So I'm going to scroll down just to show you what those look like. So there they are. In this lesson, we have assignments that ask the participant to read an excerpt from the Preschool Learning Foundations, Volume 1. They also read an article about developmentally appropriate practice along with a couple of research briefs. Let's imagine that we've watched all of the video lessons in Course 1 and you've completed all of the assignments. At this point, you'd then be taken back to the Course 1 page. I'm going to click the Course 1 link. And because I've completed all of the required assignments, I'm now able to print a certificate of completion, which can be found down at the bottom of the page. Okay, so that's the end of the website tour. Next, you'll hear from Dr. Ross Thompson and Dr. Hallie Yopp, who are both key contributors in the development of these modules. But first, we're going to take a short break. You're welcome to type questions using our web chat during Dr. Thompson's presentation. He'll answer some of those questions toward the end of his presentation. So please enjoy your break and we'll be right back.
Well, welcome back. It's good to have you here this morning. My name is Ross Thompson. I'm a professor of psychology at the University of California, Davis. At Davis, I teach classes in social and emotional personality development, and I also study that in the social emotional development lab. More relevant to the activities of this morning, I was one of the principal authors of the Preschool Learning Foundations in Social Emotional Development, and also was one of the authors of the Curriculum Frameworks in Social Emotional Development, the companion volume to the Frameworks document. I was also involved in developing the online modules that this activity is helping to preview. And so I've been involved in issues relating to transitional kindergarten for an awfully long time. In fact, one of the other activities that I do in my spare time is to function as an advisory committee for one of the major research organizations that is evaluating the effects of transitional kindergarten on children's development. And you might be interested to know that in addition to looking at the outcomes having to do with children's cognitive and language performance, their mathematical understanding and other cognitive skills, we're also looking at the effects of transitional kindergarten on their social emotional development. And that's because of the recognition that transitional kindergarten offers an opportunity, an unparalleled opportunity really, not only to promote children's cognitive and mathematical understanding, but to also contribute to the development of the social emotional skills that are really, really important to their ability to learn in a TK classroom and also to prepare them to learn in a primary grade classroom. So those are the kinds of things I'd like to talk with you a little bit about this morning as a way of previewing some of the modules relating to social emotional development that you can find online. It's worth mentioning that although to people perhaps outside the educational system, social emotional development might be a kind of a nice accompaniment to the more important learning tasks that are going on in a transitional classroom, transitional kindergarten classroom. You and I know that social emotional learning is really important right at the beginning. That, to put it somewhat differently, early learning is social and emotional at its core. And that's because when we think about the ways that a transitional kindergarten classroom works, we recognize that a child's ability to learn, to function successfully in that classroom, depends very much on a whole network of social, emotional, self-regulatory skills, and also their sense of self. I mean, look at the variety of kinds of skills that children really need in order to be able to function well in a transitional kindergarten classroom. There are skills, for example, related to children's group participation, their ability of children with different skill levels to be able to cooperate and work together with each other. The guided participation that teachers are offering children individually and in groups to promote their learning. Group participation involved in shared decision making and collaborative discovery, sharing enthusiasm for new learning. The idea that in a group situation somebody asks a question and the teacher says, let's find out, and together learning takes place. All those are social skills that children have to be able to master and to be able to use in order to succeed in a TK classroom. There are also skills related to social interaction, being able to cooperate, having respect for others' points of views, even if they're different from your own, resolving disagreement, as well as just general skills of understanding other people's social cues, knowing how to respond in a competent fashion, and being able to interpret and respond to others' emotions in a suitable fashion. That all has to go on successfully within a TK classroom in order for kids to be able to enjoy that as a learning environment. And finally, there's also a child's developing sense of self and their developing individuality. That has to do with the child's confidence in themselves as a learner, their ability to take initiative in learning situations, to be curious, to ask questions, to probe problem-solving tasks further, as well as a whole network of self-regulatory skills that enable children to focus their attention, to concentrate their thinking, to manage their emotions and impulses. So when I go into a transitional kindergarten classroom, what is at the forefront for me are the remarkable skills that children are developing in interacting with each other, in understanding themselves and other people, and understanding how to function as a group. And that's in addition to, but it also facilitates the kind of cognitive and language and mathematical understanding and scientific understanding and all the other things that we're trying to promote in a transitional kindergarten classroom. So it's fair to say, by way of summary, that a transitional kindergarten classroom offers significant opportunities for developing literacy and number skills. That's obvious and that's true, and TK classrooms are successful in doing that. But it's also a fantastic opportunity for developing social, emotional, and self-regulatory skills. And so my task in the time that I have remaining with you is to talk with you a little bit about some of the foundational accomplishments that take place in the three central domains of social emotional development that are included in the preschool learning foundations. And those three domains have to do with the development of the self, which is important to how children interact with other kids and with teachers in a classroom. It has to do with the development of social interaction skills, which has to do with not just their behavior toward others, but also their understanding of other people and how to interact with them. And it also has to do with the development of relationships, because, in many respects, relationships are absolutely foundational. They give meaning to the interactions that children have, and in some respects are the fundamental motivators of children's excitement about learning and their confidence in themselves. So let's talk about these in turn, turning first to the development of self. Now, there are lots of aspects of the development of self that we talk about in the online learning modules, and they're all important to how children are functioning in a classroom. They have to do with children's self-confidence, their belief that when faced with a problem task, when faced with a learning challenge, they have the tools to be able to do it and to succeed, even if their first efforts are unsuccessful. Self also has to do with a developing self-awareness of one's own characteristics and skills, so that part of what is happening in a transitional kindergarten classroom is that children are developing a sense of what they can do and how well they can do it. And part of the excitement of being in a classroom like that is as children are watching their skills develop, and of course social comparison also helping them to see those skills in relation to other kids. But the part of the development of self that I want to focus on in the few minutes I have with you today is really to talk about the development of self-regulation. Because in many respects, as you know, self-regulation is central to a lot of how a child is able to successfully function in a transitional kindergarten classroom. And for children who are not functioning successfully in that classroom, self-regulatory problems are often at the core of their difficulty. So that when I speak with early educators, when I talk to groups focused on transitional kindergarten, oftentimes the question that I get most frequently has to do with how do we understand the wide range and variability that exists in children's self-regulatory abilities, and what do we do about that? Because that has lots to do with how children are able to learn and function in the classroom. Well, there's a good news, bad news story here, and I'll give it to you straight up. The bad news story is that the parts of the brain that govern children's self-control are among the most slowly developing parts of the entire brain. Children who are developing self-regulatory skills in transitional kindergarten are in many respects just taking their first baby steps in developing the neurobiological capacities for self-control and self-regulation. This is a developmental process that's going to be continuing on throughout their adolescence and into their early adult years. So although children in transitional kindergarten are better at self-regulation than they were when they were much younger, they still have a long way to go. And we always need to keep that in mind in shaping our expectations for how much self-regulation we ought to expect of children with respect to managing their attention, focusing their thinking, managing their emotions, and controlling their impulses. Maybe that's the bad news. We wish they could be more advanced than they are. The good news is that children in the transitional kindergarten period are making major advances in self-regulatory development. If you compare the skills, or perhaps the lack of skills, with which a 3-year-old approaches common behavioral tasks of self-control, and compare that 3-year-old to a 5-year-old, you really see a world of difference. And it's consistent with what the research tells us, that the period of development from age 3 to age 5 is a period of very significant growth. And the other part of the good news story is that there's a lot that can occur in a transitional kindergarten classroom that can help promote those skills. So that, and wherever children are in self-regulatory ability when they come into a transitional kindergarten classroom, there are things in their experience in that classroom, things that teachers can do to help ensure that all those kids come out of the classroom and are ready to go on to their next kindergarten experience with greater self-regulatory capacity and really ready to learn. Now, those of us who study self-regulation recognize that the concept is a broad one. And what it really refers to are a set of cognitive skills that enable children to manage their thinking, their attention, their emotions, and their impulses. And those cognitive skills are what scientists call executive functions. You may have heard that term elsewhere. And these executive functions function very much like an executive control center, governing children's thinking, their attention, and their behavior. A way of thinking about it, and one that we talk about in the online modules, is that we can think of executive functions as being like the air traffic controllers of the mind. They're the parts that help to manage all the inputs that are coming into our thinking, that are grabbing our attention, that are demanding our action, and they help to organize and to prioritize and to ensure that we act in a way that is appropriate and suitable to the situation rather than impulsively. Well, it turns out there are basically 3 central executive functions that are developing rapidly in the transitional kindergarten period. One of these is what we call inhibition. And as the term implies, inhibition refers to the ability to resist a strong inclination to do one thing and instead do something else that is most appropriate or needed. Now, as adults, we use inhibition all the time as we are thinking of what is the right thing to say to somebody rather than what we might impulsively want to say, or inhibition in doing the thing that is most important or needed, even though we'd really rather take a break and eat a donut. And inhibition is something that children are developing rapidly but still struggling with in the preschool years. Inhibition is involved, for example, in a child's ability to stay on task. And being able to resist the temptations to have their attention distracted elsewhere. Inhibition's involved in the willingness or the ability of children to keep raising their hands until the teacher calls on you, rather than blurting out your thinking, your thoughts, and your answer. And of course, inhibition is involved in children's social interactions, in resisting the impulse to respond aggressively when a child provokes you instead of using words. And so inhibition or inhibitory control is a hard-won achievement that is taking place, that is developing during this period of life. That's one of the executive functions. Another of the executive functions is cognitive flexibility. Now, cognitive flexibility is something that we all need. We need to be cognitively focused to get things done, but we need to be not rigid, and that's where cognitive flexibility is involved. We can define cognitive flexibility, therefore, as the ability to switch attention or perspective or mental focus, to be able to switch when we need to as we're taking in information, as we're responding to complex situations. And again, preschoolers struggle a lot with mental flexibility. It's often what makes them look egocentric, even though they really aren't. So cognitive flexibility is involved, for example, in transitions, in being able to mentally and behaviorally move yourself out of one activity in order to move into something else. It involves the ability, cognitive flexibility is involved in the ability to adjust to changes in plans or schedules, rather than becoming upset because the predictable thing is not necessarily going to follow. Cognitive flexibility is involved in creative problem solving and being able to think of an alternative solution when your first attempt is unsuccessful. Cognitive flexibility is relevant socially as well, in coming up with creative problems to social conflicts. And so this too is a hard-won executive function that contributes to children's self-regulation in the transitional kindergarten period. Now, the third of the executive functions is a little bit surprising. We call it working memory, and as the term implies, working memory involves holding information in mind while mentally working on it. It's something that we as adults do all the time. And one of the important challenges for children in the preschool years is how they can use their memory in a way that enables them to manipulate information without losing it, without getting distracted, without forgetting things. And of course, one of the things that we know about younger children is how readily distractible and easily they forget things that they are told or instructions they are given. And so part of the growth that occurs in working memory during this period is the ability that children begin showing to follow multi-step instructions without needing constant reminders by a teacher. That involves working memory, or managing transitions, or remembering a story narrative from beginning to end to connect different aspects of the plot. And of course, working memory is involved in social interaction, and we see this all the time in children's social pretend play, being able to keep the roles of different partners in that pretend play scenario in mind, as well as the narrative that they're playing out. So working memory, like the other executive functions, is a hard-won accomplishment that is taking place during the transitional kindergarten period. So that the age in which children are in a TK classroom is a period of formative development and a significant advance in self-regulation, even though they have a long way to go. And the fact is that a lot of what children are doing in a transitional kindergarten classroom, a lot of their interactions with teachers and other children, can contribute to the development of inhibition, to the development of cognitive flexibility, to the development of working memory that can help strengthen children's self-regulatory skill. Here's some of the things that happen that contribute to these kinds of abilities. We can help children to use their language to regulate their actions and thinking. We always talk to children about using words instead of acting out their feelings, but it turns out that using words is a fantastic self-regulatory skill when it comes to anything that children are doing, whether they're solving a problem or working on a task or engaged in any kind of activity. When children are narrating and self-talking themselves through it, it helps to keep them focused. And of course, that's related to inhibition. One of the things that transitional kindergarten teachers can do is to help children learn games with rules, because they're ready to do that at age 5, but then have the game designed in such a way that you can switch the rules to create a new game. And that, of course, contributes to the cognitive flexibility of knowing that the rule applied first, but now it doesn't apply and a different rule applies. And that's something that 5-year-olds are ready for. Creating classroom rules and monitoring peers and their own compliance with them is something that contributes to many social emotional skills in a TK classroom, but it also contributes to working memory and the development of inhibition. When children are tattletales, that's actually a good thing, because it means that children are monitoring the other kids' behavior according to rules, and that is a real skill in working memory. Of course, monitoring their own behavior is important too. Take the perspective of another child with whom you disagree, and teachers can guide children in doing that. And that's a great contribution to cognitive flexibility. Understand that other people have different points of view and that they can be respected. We, of course, can coach children in strategies for inhibiting their impulses, helping them remind themselves through verbal reminders, self-talk, giving them physical reminders like a mat to sit on in circle time so they don't move away from it, and that can contribute to inhibition. Above all, we need to be important and consciously aware of having developmentally appropriate expectations for children's self-regulation in a transitional kindergarten classroom. To give them challenges and opportunities that are suitable to what we know they're capable of and don't exceed the brain's slow development of self-control. And we also need to respect individual differences in self-control, recognizing again that kids don't come into the classroom and they don't function in the classroom all at the same level. And therefore, some children are going to be much more capable of self-control because of temperament reasons, and also because of family background reasons than other children will be. And that's an important part of how we recognize these differences and take them into account in the expectations we have for children. So this is a kind of a preview of some of the central take-home messages about self-regulation. It's a topic in which the research is expanding considerably in ways that are really relevant to how we work with kids in a transitional kindergarten classroom and try to promote the development of their self-regulation. If it's okay with you, I'd like to move on to the second domain in the social emotional field, and that has to do with social interaction. Nobody who's been in a transitional kindergarten classroom has to be told that this classroom is a fertile environment for the development of skills of social interaction. And children of this age are really poised for new advances in how they see themselves in relation to the rest of the group, in their abilities to enlist developing social and emotional understanding of other people's feelings, recognition of social signals, and knowing how to respond appropriately and helpfully. And they're also becoming capable not just of developing this understanding, but of enlisting this into social interaction, in developing skills to cooperate with other kids, to figure out ways of responding appropriately to people's feelings and needs in the classroom environment, and also developing more complex and more sophisticated skills for conflict negotiation, turn-taking, bargaining, finding ways that everybody gets something of what they want. So this is a really exciting time for 5-year-olds. And again, a transitional kindergarten classroom is a remarkably effective environment in helping to develop these skills. Now, what's happening to contribute to them? Well, children are having lots of interactions with peers, of course. And it's remarkable, the conversations that go on, the behavioral strategies you observe, the ways in which children are learning simply through experience with their friends, the kinds of things you do or don't do that enable you to get along with other kids. But they're also having interactions with teachers. And what is value added about a child's interaction with an adult, whether it's a teacher or a parent or an aide or somebody else, is the ways in which, not just in interaction, but also in conversation, children develop great insight into themselves, into other people as social actors, and in those conversations begin learning new things about themselves in the social world. It's something that my colleagues and I have been studying in our research lab a lot. We look at conversations between parents and children, and sometimes between out-of-home care providers and children about the child's own recent experiences involving social and emotional experiences. Here's an illustration of one of the research episodes. This one involves a caregiver talking with a child about an experience that took place yesterday, when this child, his name was Joey, was playing with some friends, and he began to think that the other kids were ganging up on him, and so he turned off the game and shut off the interaction. And what this caregiver does is to talk with Joey about what happened in ways that really reflect the ways that adults can, through their conversation, contribute to the development of social and emotional understanding. She says, first of all, validating his point of view, his experience, she said, you didn't like that he was bouncing your guy off the game, and that made you really mad. She shows that she understands what happened and validates his own experience. She further says it's hard when you feel so angry. You're going, she's bouncing my guy off there, right? And of course that gives Joey a chance to say, right, that's how I felt. And again, gives him a sense of being understood, which is really important in these conversations. And then she probes a little bit further. She adds a perspective. She says, well, how did the other kids feel when you turned off the game? Did they want to play more? That might not have been something that he thought about. And taking another child's perspective, of course, is part of the cognitive flexibility involved in self-regulation, but it's also what contributes to an expanded emotional understanding of other people. And then she adds some more information. She says, you know, after you stopped the game, the other guy said, Joey wasn't really doing so bad. You thought you were losing, but you weren't. And so she adds some information. She adds a point of view. She adds a way of thinking about the situation that Joey may not have thought about. And then finally she wraps it up by suggesting, I wonder what you could do differently if something like this happens again. What our research has shown is that conversations like this, especially if they're built around a child's experience in the recent past, are incredibly powerful ways of developing social and emotional understanding. Because children at this age are like sponges for new insight into why other people are doing the things they do, and why did somebody react emotionally to me the way they did, and why didn't that social overture that I tried didn't work? And they'll soak up what we tell them. And even better, if our conversation causes them to think more, if it stimulates their own reflection on their own experience, then those conversations are especially provocative and fertile climates for social and emotional development. And so that's one of the things that can happen in a transitional kindergarten classroom. And I should point out that it's not just in this case or in other cases. It's not just what is said, it's how it's said. It's the way it's said in the context of respect for the child's feelings, validation of the child's point of view, but also probing and provoking the child's thought about alternative strategies, alternative perspectives, different ways of approaching this. So this is important. It's one of the ways in which social emotional development takes place. There's something else that is important that is happening in a transitional kindergarten classroom, and it's something that is really special. And so I draw your attention to it in thinking about the ways children are learning about becoming a classroom citizen. This is not something that you typically see preschoolers thinking a lot about. But one of the most important advances in social development that takes place in the transitional kindergarten period is how children begin to think of themselves and their roles within a broader social group. And of course, their experiences in a TK classroom can have a lot to do with stimulating their thinking in this way. As you can see in this job chart for children in the green room, in which different children have different responsibilities for the maintenance of this room. This job chart is one of many ways in which we can contribute to children's sense that they share a responsibility for our classroom. that it's not the teacher's classroom and it's not the school's classroom. This is our classroom, and therefore we have some responsibilities for maintaining it, taking care of it, cleaning it up, even if we didn't make the mess. And that's part of becoming a classroom citizen. Of sharing, problem solving, and decision making. Children at age 5 are ready to learn about how decisions can be made by a group. Not all decisions, of course, but how some decisions can be made in a group. And what happens if you are in the minority? What happens if you're in the majority? And how do we respect the shared consensus that emerges? And of course, that relates to respecting different points of view. And hear other people's perspectives and opinions, even if you don't agree with them. That's part of becoming a classroom citizen. Developing skills for resolving disagreements that involve even more than using words, but using words that lead to shared understanding and maybe even lead to some shared activity that will make everybody satisfied. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, becoming a classroom citizen involves developing understanding not just of classroom rules, because younger children do that, but developing understanding of the reasons behind the rules and why we have the procedures we do in our classroom. And of course, again, transitional kindergarten teachers can help contribute to that, so that when a child arrives late for circle time, you know, instead of just saying, let's all move back a little bit so Mandy can join us, perhaps saying, let's all move back a little bit so Mandy can join us because we want everybody to participate in circle time. Giving a child an understanding of the reason for the rule rather than just understanding the rule itself. Children in transitional kindergarten are ready for this, and they're poised for this, and their experiences in the classroom can help contribute to this. And so becoming a classroom citizen is also one of the advances in social and emotional understanding and in the skills of social interaction that take place during this time. I'd like to turn then to the last domain of the social and emotional foundations, and it has to do with relationships. Relationships are central to everything that takes place in a transitional kindergarten classroom. Sometimes relationships are like the bedrock from which social interaction and the learning that relates to it derives. We often don't pay attention to those relationships, but they nurture and feed all the interactions that take place. And the reason for that is that children in transitional kindergarten share a characteristic with who they were at younger ages, which is that the relationships they have with teachers and peers are absolutely foundational to their experience of themselves as learners and to their experiences of the classroom social environment. And then when those relationships are positive and are supportive of the child, learning flourishes, in part because the support and security experienced in those relationships inspires children to have confidence in their curiosity and in their learning skills. But on the other hand, when those relationships are not functioning well, when there is recurrent conflict, when children do not feel like they connect with their teachers, then it can impair all those other qualities. So we were very, very intentional when we began thinking about what preschool learning foundations were in the social emotional domain of giving a lot of attention to the quality of early relationships. And of course, when a child is in a classroom in transitional kindergarten, they're simply expanding the range of relationships that are part of their experience and from which they're drawing emotional support. Because when a child comes into the classroom, of course, they have a history of their experience of their attachments to parents, which all of our research tells us is a foundation for children's sense of security, their sense of support, their sense of self. And so, in a sense, every child brings into a transitional kindergarten classroom a legacy of some absolutely central relationships that have characterized their life up to this point. And of course, they also may be carrying with them also a legacy of other kinds of relationships occurring out of the home. Close relationships with teachers and caregivers, which will expand in their transitional kindergarten experience, provide children with new experiences of developing trust and feeling supported. In a sense, in a very real sense, What children of this age are doing is developing a library of experience of relationships that are telling them what different people are like, that are helping them to understand the skills of interacting with different kinds of people, and are helping them see themselves in different ways through their experience of different close relationships. And transitional kindergarten expands that in giving them new teachers with whom to develop these relationships of trust and support. Of course, that doesn't exhaust the range of relationships that children are experiencing. They're also experiencing friendships. Friendships that have preceded their entering a transitional kindergarten classroom, and new friendships that form in that classroom. And friendships give children the experience of being close to someone at your level. Different kind of relationship, of course, than they form with adults, with different expectations for what happens. But we have learned that peer relationships are absolutely unique in the support that children experience from them, in the things that children learn from their peers, and in the ways that peer relationships contribute to a child's developing sense of self. Of course, what's important about these relationships is not just the influence that each one has on the child, but the fact that they're all interconnected. That when a child comes into a transitional kindergarten classroom with that library of previous experiences of relationships from the past, they're adding to that library, but they're also drawing upon it in thinking about how to interact now with this new teacher, with these new teachers, with these new peers. And so past relationships have an influence on the new relationships that children forge. And one of the ways in which that happens is the ways that transitional kindergarten teachers can support the development of positive, constructive peer relationships. It's not necessarily so that new children coming into a classroom are necessarily going to, on their own, successfully be able to forge close friendships with other kids. Because peer relationships are hard. They're not easy to do. And the skills of being a successful peer interactor are hard won. They're sometimes painstakingly constructed by kids. And there's a lot that the adults in their lives, in particular the teachers in a transitional kindergarten classroom, can do to help children forge successful constructive peer relationships. They do so in many ways, such as through coaching, social interaction skills. This happens a lot when kids are in conflict, and teachers can be involved in helping children think through alternative solutions to their disagreement that might be more successful. There can be role-playing activities in which children are taking the perspective of other kids or kids with different backgrounds or experiences in order to induce that cognitive flexibility that can make peer relationships go well. Encouraging perspective taking can have a similar kind of view. A similar kind of goal, and above all, using words to clarify each child's point of view to the other. Of course, eventually, children will be capable much more effectively of using their own words to convey clearly their own point of view, but before they're ready to do that, a teacher's words can help to convey that same alternative perspective. And all this is important of what a teacher or another adult is doing because, as I mentioned, forging constructive, successful peer relationships is not necessarily an easy task. Here's all that's involved in it. Children are having to develop social maintenance skills. In other words, once you've started interacting with a child, what do you do to keep it going successfully, to ensure that you're still playing together and conflict doesn't erupt? That's not easy. I should say that initiating social interaction with an unfamiliar peer is also really tough as well. Another of these is social problem-solving skills. What happens when you've built a tall tower and somebody runs by and it falls down, and now you're trying to figure out, did that person knock it over, or was that just an accident? And there is a lot that goes into figuring out how you understand people's motives and their intentions, but also how you respond when social conflict emerges. Those are social problem-solving skills that children are developing in this period. Of course, there's conflict resolution, and children of this age are learning because they're ready to learn about turn-taking, about compromise, about negotiation in a way that was not true at an earlier age. There's the social and emotional understanding that we've been talking about in developing a broader and deeper understanding of why other people act as they do, and the internal mental states, the feelings, the goals, the desires, the needs, the individual personalities that contribute to other people's actions. There's social comparison processes that take place in a transitional kindergarten classroom, some of which can promote their social and cognitive competence when children are motivated to learn and to grow and to behave more competently because of the examples of their peers. But of course, social comparison can go in the other way as well, about which the less said the better. And then there are children's concepts of fairness. Fairness being an early foundation for their own intuitive moral sense. And the question of what is fair? Does it mean that everybody gets treated the same way? Does it mean that people get treated according to what their needs are? That might not be the same thing. And the transitional kindergarten years are really the beginning of what will be a continuing unfolding of understandings of fairness that will help to shape children's beliefs about what constitute right relationships and right kinds of interactions between themselves and other people. Well, we've talked about the three domains of the social and emotional foundations. We've talked about elements of the developing self, particularly in a social context. We've talked about skills of social interaction and how those are forged by experiences in a transitional kindergarten classroom. And then we've talked about the importance of relationships, both with teachers and other adults, as well as with peers. And I want to close by simply pointing out what I hope is obvious in what I've been saying, which is that these domains are not independent of each other. And in fact, they go together. And so in our conversation today about different elements of self, about different aspects of social interaction, about the important developmental role of relationships, we've been in a position to already see the ways in which these things go together. The ways in which skills of self-regulation, for example, both promote social competence in a classroom, but also how that social experiences help to contribute to the growth of the executive functions related to inhibition and working memory and cognitive flexibility. We know that the quality of children's relationships are a significant influence on children's skills of social interaction. So these capabilities are constantly interacting with each other. And I should say, but I don't have enough time to go into detail, but that these social and emotional skills are also important contributors to children's cognitive development, and children's cognitive growth feeds into developing social emotional understanding. So this is all of a piece because children's development is not divided into different domains. And of course, the foundations that we create early on create a basis for the skills that children will bring with them into the primary grades, the secondary grades, and eventually into adult life. Well, I hope this has been helpful to you as a preview in considering these three different domains and give you a little bit of a sense as to what we profiled in the online modules. So thank you for being here this morning, and I hope that some of what we've said is of value to you. Now, I think I've done something remarkable. I think I've ended early enough so that there are some questions. And I know that you have had a chance to phone in or to be able to present your questions. So let's see what they are, because some of them have already arrived. Okay, so one question is, can you say more about how children's temperament affects their ability to self-regulate? It seems like the kids in a TK classroom are really all over the map in their self-control. And isn't that an observation that all of us would agree with? Kids come into transitional kindergarten at very, very different stages in their self-regulatory abilities, in their capacities to exercise self-control. How do we understand where these come from? Well, temperament is one factor. And it can both contribute to and it can also impede children's self-regulatory skill. There is a temperament quality that researchers call effortful control. Effortful control. And as the name suggests, effortful control has to do with a child's ability to intentionally manage their attention and their thoughts, and to intentionally choose to do an appropriate or suitable response, even when they prefer to do something else. So when we think about effortful control in that way, being able to intentionally manage your attention and thinking, and being able to intentionally choose what we might say a subdominant response, the more appropriate thing to do rather than what you might want to do, that sounds a lot like self-regulation, and in fact it is. Teachers can readily identify the children who are high in effortful control in their classrooms because these are the children who, when it's time to stand in line, they're often the first in line. When it's time to sit still, these are the kids who are sitting still. And when it's time, when instructions are given, these are the kids who follow the instructions from beginning to end without needing reminders. And it's natural for any teacher to look at those kids and say, that's the way a 5-year-old should be. What's wrong with all these other kids? And the problem is not that there's something wrong with all those other kids who are slow to stand in line and do not sit still and need reminders. They're typical 5-year-olds. These other kids who are doing all the right things at all the right times, they have a temperamental boost that contributes to their self-regulatory competence in a special way. So we need to be careful about our expectations when we see those kids who are high in effortful control. Now, it turns out that temperament can also impede self-regulation. This is particularly true for children who, not surprisingly, are high on a temperamental dimension we call impulsivity, or who are high on temperamental negative emotion, that is, who are highly emotional, particularly in a negative sense. And these are the kids who may have more difficulty managing their impulses and their emotions. And again, the problem is not, they're not bad kids. Sometimes these kids are as surprised by their failures at self-control as the adults are. It's rather that they have temperamental qualities that make this harder for them and therefore may require more support from adults around them. So temperament is important in this way. I should point out, by the way, because I didn't earlier, that one other characteristic, one other quality that can influence children's self-regulatory ability is the amount of stress they're experiencing elsewhere in their lives. Now, many early educators I speak with tell me that they think they're seeing many more children in their classrooms who seem to be showing signs of stress than they can remember having seen in past years. And it does seem to be true that young children are, for many reasons, coming to preschool and transitional kindergarten classrooms showing these signs of stress. And one of the things that we know about how stress affects the brain in adults as well as children is that stress makes self-regulation much harder. It makes it harder for us to concentrate. It makes it harder for us to focus our attention. It makes it harder for us to manage our emotions. It makes it harder for us to control our impulses. And that's true of adults as well as children. So if we have identified some children in our transitional kindergarten classroom who seem to be showing some of the signs that life might not all be right for them outside of the classroom, then we might also anticipate that these are the children who are going to be presenting us greater self-regulatory challenges than other kids are. And in recognizing that, we might find that helping them become better self-regulated may require helping them manage the stress and the consequences of it when they're with us in the classroom. Giving them experiences of calm collection, a quiet place to withdraw to when things begin to get overwhelming. Coaching them in stress management techniques, deep breathing, it would be one example. And providing them with the kind of support that they may specially need. Those may not only help these children be able to be more collected in a classroom, regardless of what is happening outside in their experience, but it may also contribute to their self-regulatory skills, especially when we combine that with some of the other self-regulatory techniques that I talked about earlier. I hope that's helpful. Well, here's another one. This is a question I often get asked. As a classroom teacher, how do I support children's social emotional development and focus on supporting academic skills? In other words, how do we have the time to do everything? And I think that I think that part of the answer here is not expecting that we necessarily are going to be setting aside time for social emotional learning in the curriculum, but rather infusing it into many of the other activities that we are doing that serve other purposes. And of course what that reflects is what a skilled transitional kindergarten teacher recognizes at the outset, which is that oftentimes the activities in your classroom are serving multiple purposes. So why not social emotional purposes as well as serving certain kinds of cognitive skill learning development. And I think that some of the examples that I've offered are meant to illustrate how that can happen. So that when children are encouraged to use words during a science experiment, as they're coaching their way through, to keep them focused and to keep them thinking about what they're doing. We are both contributing to the development of inhibitory control, a self-regulatory skill, at the same time that they're doing a science experiment. Sometimes teachers will have children who are early readers read to each other. But of course, it's very hard for the child who is not the reader to listen quietly to their partner. And so one technique is to give that listener a simple picture card of an ear. And that becomes a physical reminder of what their role is that enables them to do what they're supposed to do as they're awaiting their opportunity to read. And of course, if the learner's task is to repeat back what the story was that was read to them a moment ago, that also contributes to self-regulatory skill, even as pre-reading skills are being developed. So I think that part of the challenge here is to think about the ways in which we can be mindful of social emotional learning as part and parcel of the other activities that we do, rather than as an independent part of the curriculum. Well, I hope that's a useful idea. So another question here is, can you speak about the role of structured activities and unstructured play in the development of social emotional skills in transitional kindergarten? And the short answer, of course, is that both are important, but probably more needs to be said here. Because each plays a different role, right? Structured activities, that is, things that a teacher organizes as a way of promoting a child's emotional understanding through role-playing, through storybook reading. The ways in which a structured activity may help coach children in conflict resolution skills involve activities that are unlikely to arise spontaneously in children's unstructured play. These are the kinds of skills that do require some kind of structured input, especially from an adult. And conversations about the child's recent experiences and helping the child look at that experience from a different lens and consider different ways of responding is also part of that structured activity. But it's also true that unstructured play provides a proving ground, a testing ground on which those new skills can be exercised and refined. And so if children don't have the experience of unstructured play with other children, but also with teachers, then they don't have the opportunities to see how these skills and how this knowledge works in practice. So I would argue that both are important. And I do want to emphasize that unstructured play with teachers can be valuable as well. There's nothing like an adult being involved in social pretend play with 5-year-olds, and then right in the middle of the play, change the plot, introduce something new, and see how the children respond. That, of course, contributes to the cognitive flexibility of having to adjust to a plot change, but it can also be a way that an adult can contribute something provocative to what is the narrative that children are already developing. Do we have time for one more? Oh, here's one. So what can be done about children who seem to have difficulty getting along with other children in the classroom? This question probably could come from any transitional kindergarten teacher. It can come from any preschool teacher. I would say it probably could come from any teacher. So what do you do with children who have peer interaction difficulties? And I think that There are wonderful resources that I would not try to summarize in the space of a short answer, except to say that being able to effectively respond to children's peer relation difficulties involves both proactive strategies and reactive strategies. We often engage in the reactive strategies when conflict breaks out, when children are fighting, when a child is in the midst of an unconsolable temper tantrum. We have to react, and we have to find ways of coping with the immediate situation and getting the classroom environment back on track. But the proactive strategies may be more important, particularly in our being able to reflect thoughtfully about what seem to be this child's difficulties in their interactions with other children, and this requires simply some observation over a period of time. And also what might be some of the trigger events that are contributing to the outbursts that occur when they do. And I think when that kind of thoughtful problem definition goes on, teachers and classroom aides can be in a better position to think about what kind of coaching, what kind of contact with family members, what kinds of other sorts of assist to the child may be most useful. So that's probably just the beginning of an answer, but I hope it starts on the right track. So I think we're ready to move on now, and at this point you need a short break, and so we are going to take a short break before Dr. Hallie Yopp's presentation begins next. It's been a pleasure for me to be with you, and I am glad that you're here. And by the way, before I leave, thank you for the good work that you do. It is so important, and you probably don't get thanked enough. So thank you very much, and thank you for being here this morning.
Welcome back. I am very honored to be here today for this really important occasion, and so delighted to be part of the broader team across this state working on behalf of young children. My name is Hallie Yopp Slowick, also known as Hallie K. Yopp. I am a professor in the Department of Elementary and Bilingual Education at Cal State Fullerton. I also am the co-director for the CSU Center for the Advancement of Reading. I am a co-author of the ELA-ELD framework that was recently published, and I also am a co-author of the TK language and literacy modules that this webcast has as its primary intent to share with you. I'd like to also add that I have the wonderful background, if you will, of having been a kindergarten teacher for many years, and I was in a bilingual setting. I also worked to support children who are experiencing difficulty with literacy as they were growing through those grade levels. So I'm, again, thrilled to be here, and I am thrilled that so many of you are tuning in today, and that hopefully others will be watching this in the future. I'd like to share with you what my plan is for this segment of this webcast. I hope to review with you the key themes of the ELA-ELD instruction as described in the ELA-ELD framework. Hopefully it is familiar to many of you. If not, you're going to get the very quick version of what that is. I will also focus on language development and focus on foundational skills. So let's get started. This image conveys the big picture of English language arts and English language development instruction. I'm going to quickly tell you what each of these elements is, and then we will zoom in on two of those elements. The first thing that I'd like to draw your attention to is the outer ring of this image. These items on this outer ring are the overarching goals of English language arts and English language development instruction for the children and youth in the state of California. These are the goals that we fully intend to have every student achieve by the time the students exit high school. We would like them ready for college, for careers, and for civic life, for participating in their communities and beyond. We'd like them to have developed the capacities of literate individuals. We want them to be ready to navigate the 21st century demands of living well and thriving and achieving. And among those 21st century skills are the notions of being able to use technology and media well and wisely and for our own purposes, being able to communicate, collaborate, engage in critical and creative thinking, and importantly, engage effectively with global competencies, that we are able to reach out to others who are very different from ourselves, who have had different experiences, and to communicate and interact effectively with them. And finally, that children who leave our school systems will be broadly literate. They've gotten to read many wonderful works of literature. They've engaged and participated and viewed wonderful works of drama, and used spoken word to to express their views, and so forth. So those are the overarching goals where we hope to help every child move through the school system to achieve all of those, to actually maximize their future possibilities and have the most potentially rewarding lives that they can. On the inner circle of this graphic, you'll notice are the ELA, ELD standards, that these are the standards by grade level in reading, writing, listening, speaking, and language. And we use those standards as guideposts on what we would like to support children to achieve in every grade level throughout their schooling. And at the heart of that are the ELD standards that help support our English learners. Outside of this circle are smaller circles. You see these blue circles here. These are what we call the key themes of the standards. The key themes are the ways that we think about those individual grade level standards. What are the cross-cutting concepts that we are working hard to support for children? One of those is that we offer an integrated curriculum, that we are ensuring that the curriculum is not seen in silos, that science and social studies and literacy are richly infused with one another, that reading, writing, listening, speaking, and language deeply and richly are intertwined and support one another. So we are aiming for an integrated curriculum in which nothing is treated in a manner that is divorced from any other subject matter. We're looking for a motivating and engaging context. I'm sorry, I'm in the white field now. I jumped to that. The integrated context, a motivating and engaging context for all children. We're looking for a respectful context, and this is what I deeply appreciated about Dr. Thompson's presentation, that notion of social emotional development and supporting. Part of a respectful context is ensuring that we're addressing the needs, the social emotional needs of children, that we are ensuring that we are valuing and honoring and respecting their familial backgrounds, their cultural experiences, their interests, and so forth, that we are aiming to provide the most respectful kind of context that we can for all learners. And finally, in terms of that white field, the context of having all students experience an intellectually challenging learning activities and so forth, so that all children have the opportunity to achieve their highest potential. So now let's go back to those smaller blue circles. We said that those are the key themes of the standards, and we're going to zero in on 2 of those today. But these 5 themes are what we see across the curriculum. We see this across all strands of the language arts. We want children thinking about language and literacy as meaningful. It is a meaningful endeavor. Children are making meaning, they're constructing meaning, they're understanding what others are sharing with them. That another key theme of all those standards is that language development is at the heart of what we do, that language is supported as we read, as we address those the standards in all of the domains. That effective expression means how we use language, how we use print to convey our feelings and to powerfully impact others. Perhaps we want to persuade them, perhaps we want to entertain them. that we build content knowledge, and that we support the development of foundational skills. So these are the key themes, and there is so much more that could be said about them, and you can, of course, read about them in the English Language Arts English Language Development Framework. But I'd like to argue right now that this graphic is also true in terms of how we might think about our preschool learning foundations, that those too we care about, whether children are engaging in meaning making, whether they're developing the foundational skills, whether there's effective instruction, effective expression, whether the language development is being supported, and content knowledge. And if you look closely through those preschool foundations, you will see that all of these things bubble out. And so therefore, the preschool foundations and the K through 12 standards are part of this wonderful continuum of learning for children. And the beauty is that our transitional kindergarten teachers have the wonderful opportunity to draw from children's earlier experiences in preschool, basing their understandings and their instruction and their observations of children on those preschool foundations as they move them through and toward those kindergarten standards and beyond, depending on the individual children in the classroom. So having said that, this wonderful notion of a continuum of learning, and that all of us are working hard to support children, and TK teachers especially have this wonderful opportunity to infuse so much of what we know about young children, so much we know about early childhood, so much of what we know about language and literacy and learning into our classrooms daily on behalf of children. And we hope that administrators will be looking at this with the same kind of eye. So let's zoom in on two of these key themes that are profoundly important in terms of supporting children's literacy development in the years ahead. These two key themes have been demonstrated over and over again by the research to be powerfully predictive of current and future success in literacy acquisition. And I think we could all agree that that's an incredible goal and a primary goal of instruction for young children, that we care about them all becoming literate individuals so that they can maximally engage with text and share their own feelings and thoughts and ideas and information through the printed word. So let's look specifically at language development. Why language development? Language development, language is the cornerstone of literacy. Language is what we read. If you think about that, you will recognize that no matter what language we speak, English, Spanish, Vietnamese, Farsi, whether signed language, no matter what language we speak, that is what we represent in print. That matters in what we do. And no matter how we read, whether we use assistive technology, whether we read through Braille, whether we're visually engaging with print on the page, what are we reading? We are reading language. What we read is language put into print or put into some tactile form. I'd like to share, in fact, a couple of examples of language so that you recognize just how powerful a player language is in literacy development. I have a few examples here. One is from The Ugly Duckling, and it's that the wind took hold of the leaves and danced them about. The Ugly Duckling by Hans Christian Andersen. Think about that language. The wind took hold of the leaves and danced them about. Think about the language in Irene Hunt's Across 5 Aprils, the story of a young man growing up during the Civil War period. She states, "Autumn was blithely indifferent to the tumult in the land that year." If you don't own that language as a reader, you are not going to be communicating well with text. Reading is a language process in its most fundamental form. What we read is language. Here's an excerpt from Jewel Parker Rhodes' Ninth Ward, a wonderful book about a young girl surviving Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, in the Ninth Ward of New Orleans. "Unlike dirt, water seems alive. moving and shifting, always making lapping sounds against the boat and the shore. What we read is language, and the richer our language, the more likely we are to communicate well with language, the more likely with text, the richer our language, the more likely we are to be able to use language to express our own feelings in writing or in speech. I have a few slides here that share with you some of the research on the importance of language. So let's just share a few of these quotes from the preschool framework, Volume 1, Preschool Curriculum Framework. We have these 4 points that are made, and I think they're really crucial that we think about this, that language is essential for cognitive development. Language is essential for reading achievement, which is the point we'll be arguing much of the rest of this first part of this segment. Language is important for overall school performance, and it's important for social relations as we attempt to communicate with one another, as we attempt to express our needs, as we attempt to share our feelings or information, and so forth. It allows us to interact well with others, to express ourselves. Here's another quote from the research. We know that early oral language abilities provide the foundation for development of the advanced oral language skills necessary for successful comprehension in older readers. We know that oral language skills make an important contribution to literacy development as reading tasks become more complex over the years. We know that comprehension is dependent on the abilities that children have been developing since birth. And we know that there is wide variation in the language abilities that children bring to us in transitional kindergarten. You know, if you've worked with young children, there is such variation in the language skills and abilities of young children. And this slide, I think, is one that we all need to take to heart, is that children differ markedly in their linguistic skills, and these early differences reverberate throughout a child's schooling, limiting or amplifying children's learning success. We all want to be part of that amplifying of learning success. So here is, let's see, I've got my slide here. Here is the answer to the question, so how do we do that? How do we be part of the amplification of learning success? How do we be part of ensuring that that language development occurs in our classrooms and we are maximizing our opportunities to support children as they move forth, as we're laying that groundwork that gives children the language and continues to help that language grow and expand so that they are well positioned, well poised to take advantage of that as they engage with richer and more complex texts for their own purposes in the years ahead. How do we do this? Well, at its heart, how language is learned, here's what I would like you to know. We learn language by using it. We use it as we engage as active listeners. We use it as we talk with one another. We use it as we hear it being used in our environment. We learn language by using it. And so at its heart, what I'd like you to know is that when you walk into classrooms as an administrator, as an instructional leader, as a teacher yourself, do you see language occurring in that classroom? Do you see children talking with one another? Do you see teachers using sophisticated language, not talking down to children, not saying, please hand me that thing, but instead saying, please hand me the tambourine that is on the counter? Are teachers modeling that rich language? Are children having opportunities to engage with one another? Or is it only the most 5 verbal children who over and over again are contributing to classroom conversations, and other children's opportunities are more limited? We learn language by using it. In the TK modules, we share a number of things that we would like teachers to be particularly mindful of in their classroom settings, and that we think about this in terms of the environment and in terms of instruction. So that's where we're going to go for the next couple of minutes. Let's talk about what we can do in the environment to support language development, and then we'll talk a bit more about some instructional kinds of features of those classrooms to support language development. We would like all children to experience safe and respectful environments that prompt, encourage, and fuel language. What do we do in those classrooms? What are the key elements of those classrooms that help foster language development? What are the key elements in those environments that foster language development? We talk about 3 in the module. One of those is relationships. It's the people in those classrooms and the relationships that they nurture with children and among children. We need teachers who are warm, who are nurturing, who are responsive, who are listeners, who demonstrate a genuine interest in what children have to say. That we need individuals, teachers, adults, who not only engage with children and ask questions and appear interested and are genuinely interested, but that those same teachers help nurture positive relationships among children so that every child in a classroom feels safe, feels comfortable as they attempt to use language to make their needs, wishes, interests, information known. That is crucial. What are those relationships? What relationships have been established among children that allow for that kind of safe environment and respectful environment that prompts, evokes, ignites, encourages language? We also can think about the spaces in the environment. What kind of spaces in the environment that nurtures, supports language development? And we think about spaces in 2 ways. One, we think about it in terms of the large space. Is there large space where all of us get together, where we can have a shared experience together, where we build a community together? Just as Dr. Thompson was talking earlier about, we need to make space because we want everybody to join us in circle time. What we're communicating with children is that that we all matter, and that we are a community. And when you feel a member of a respected and warmly welcomed member of a community, then you are more likely to be willing to share in that community and to talk to others and to use language to communicate. But importantly, we're also building some common experiences that we can all draw on and share with one another. But it's not just having that large space, it is having a multitude of small spaces. We know from the research that language development is more likely to occur in those small spaces when children have opportunities to use language, and importantly, when the teacher is able to chat with students and carry on conversations. The teacher doesn't just stand at the front of a room and have occasional discussions with the group. He also has one-on-one conversations with individuals that prompt more back and forth, more of a multitude of exchanges on a single topic with a child. And those small group spaces allow for that. The small group spaces put 3 children in an area of choice through child-initiated activities or child-selected options in a classroom. Those children get together and there are more opportunities for them to engage linguistically with one another. We learn language by using it. How many times do children use language in the course of the day? And do those small spaces prompt that language use? And that gets us to the 3rd point, and that is the materials in the environment matter. What kinds of materials are there? Are there materials that are interesting to children? Are there materials that represent and reflect their cultural backgrounds or their familial backgrounds, or the experiences they've had, things that capture their attention, things that arouse their curiosity? And importantly, are there the kinds of materials that prompt interaction? Some materials are great for solo play over here. But there are some materials we can put in a room that stimulate children getting together and children talking and interacting with one another. If you think about dress-up centers or dramatic play areas, if you think about materials where children perhaps are creating something, building something new and using their imaginations and saying, this is a dinosaur, this is my dog, and here's what it's doing. Are there puppet houses where children are engaging with telling each other, oh, let's do this, or you be the this and I'll be the this. Opportunities for children to engage with one another, and the materials you use should not just be randomly pulled out and displayed in a classroom. You're thoughtful. What will resonate with children? What reflects their backgrounds? What helps them grow? What stimulates more thinking? What arouses questions? And what prompts them to engage with one another as they play? The quality of materials is very much related to the quality of the kinds of play that occurs, including those linguistic interactions. So, those are the 3 key points that we mention in the modules in terms of establishing an environment that stimulates, that fosters language development. The relationships, whether you're setting those up in a way that encourages talk, the spaces, whether we have space to come together, build our community, and lots of small group spaces to work in smaller groups, and the teacher can visit and participate in those and engage in multiple exchanges, and the materials that stimulate thinking, that prompt interactions and verbalizations among children. So now let's move on, if you will, to the part of our classroom that's related to instruction. So we have these wonderful environments, stimulating wonderful environments that we have offered for children. We have spaces, we have great relationships with kids, we have materials that we've been thinking about, that we have observed children using, and we say, oh, look, this material is really fantastic for getting kids to talk with one another and share ideas with one another. But there's more to offering language development opportunities in the classroom than just setting up the environment. That's crucial, but there's more to it than that. What actions is the teacher going to take? What are the transitional kindergarten teachers doing? What kind of instruction, what kind of learning experiences are they providing that advance language development? And there are just a few here that we're going to talk about today, because we can write volumes on this, of course. But I'd like to draw your attention to three key ideas. One is that we want to read aloud to children. It's critical that we spend time reading aloud to children. We read aloud every day, and we read aloud multiple times, and we read aloud in multiple contexts, sometimes with all of us together as a community, because we can all share that experience of corduroy. Or sometimes in those smaller group settings. Sometimes a child has brought a book over to the teacher and wants him or her to read that aloud to them again. There are multiple opportunities to read aloud to children, but those are not just opportunistic opportunities, if you will, in that it doesn't just happen because the opportunity presents itself. But in fact, I'm mindful as the teacher in the classroom. I'm mindful as the adult. I've been giving thought to what books do I want to bring in. I've been thinking about, I want to expose my children to multiple genres. It's not just all fairy tales. I want to expose my students to books that really ratchet up the language, the sophisticated language. Brown Bear by Bill Martin Jr. is a fantastic book. And when I was teaching kindergarten, it was the book I used the first day of school, because I wanted every child to walk home and say, Mom, Dad, Grandma, I can read. Because they got the pattern so quickly, and they just felt that they were now part of this literacy community. But Brown Bear does not do much in terms of developing language, unless a child is not an owner yet of color words or basic animal words. It does not push the envelope on language development much. It plays an important role. But as a teacher, I'm also thinking of what are books that are going to ratchet up the language? What are books that use more sophisticated language? What are books that have some more complex sentence structures in them? Still within range, especially if I stop and talk about it, right? Are there books that vocabulary I want to stop and say, oh, do you notice it says Lily was exuberant? What does exuberant mean here? Oh, let's think about how that is being talked about in this book at this point. She's thrilled, she's delighted, she's happy, she's got lots of energy going, she's exuberant about this. We want to find books that use words, and those words we talk about and we think about. Oh gosh, that was such a long sentence. Let me read that again to make sure I really understood that. So we are planning, we're using books that use more sophisticated language as part of our read alouds. We are using books that use complex sentence structures, rich vocabulary, and we are talking about the language in those books. We're drawing children's attention to the language in those books. We're also thinking about thematic books, because it's great that the word exuberant came up today on Thursday morning in September, but if exuberant doesn't come up again in any other circumstance, children are not likely to take on that language. So as we think about how are we building vocabulary, we're being mindful too about the vocabulary that's going to be relevant in that integrated curriculum, right? That it's going to appear in social studies, it's going to appear in science. I'm going to make sure I'm talking about over here, and it's also occurring in this book over here that I'm reading. And when we're walking outdoors and enjoying the weather and the slides and the equipments, I'm going to find ways thoughtfully, planfully, intentionally to bring those words back up again, because it's those repeated opportunities with vocabulary in particular that will matter if children are to take those words on, that vocabulary on as their own. It's the opportunity to then use those words too. I do something here, and then I make sure we have experiences where kids can use those words themselves. So reading aloud from a variety of books, often thematically planned, books that stretch language, that are a little more sophisticated than where the children are right now, and talking and thinking about that language is crucial. So one key idea is reading aloud in multiple contexts. And I do need to add here quickly that as we look at the research on what kinds of interventions one might use to richly impact the language development of children in a classroom, what arises from that literature over and over again is shared book reading. Reading aloud to children, and I use the word shared because it means that children too are engaging in that language, that children are interacting with it. They're responding to questions, they're listening to it, they're giving their predictions, they're making comments on it, that it is a very active process in that regard. So there's this considerable research that backs that notion of engaging children in that read aloud process. Let's move on. And we'll pick up the pace here a bit so that I have some time for some of your questions at the end. We're going to wrap up language instruction here in a moment, and then we're going to move on into that other key theme that I mentioned we will be talking about. So here is another crucial part of the instruction that supports language development, and that is that we facilitate conversations and discussions. Again, it's that notion of it not just being incidental, not just sort of happening in the moment. Those are important times, the teachable moment. Don't neglect those moments. But there's also that issue of me being mindful and purposeful in setting the stage for conversations and discussions. And part of what I do with that is to make sure that I am asking things and commenting on things in ways that are not limiting language responses, but that in fact are encouraging more expansive responses on the parts of children. So for example, if I said, do you like the pattern that I've built here? That requires a yes or no answer. I just limited the opportunity to respond to that prompt. I could conversely ask the question as, what do you notice about what I'm building right here? Likewise, I could do a quick flyby, I like to call it. Teacher walks by, a child is playing with the blocks, and that transitional kindergartner has built something magnificent, and the teacher says, oh, nice tower, good job, and keeps going. That limits opportunities for language. I could, on the other hand, go by and say, oh, this is interesting, what are you building? How are you doing it? that prompts language use. So we have to be careful and we have to be mindful as we're doing discussions. Is it all me? Am I only demanding yes or no kinds of responses? Or what color is the little red hen? Red. Okay, there we go. As opposed to what's the little red hen trying to accomplish here? How do you suppose that she feels about how the other animals are responding? So thinking about those conversations and discussions, planning questions ahead of time, thinking about how we're going to prompt, and also on occasion offering scaffolds, response frames. Oh, let's use a response frame like, I like the part in the book when, and children fill in the blank and they turn and talk to a neighbor to say what it is. Little red hen makes bread. What I like to make is blank. So that there are opportunities, and we even use those to help children develop the language for the more polite language or school language. Would you please pass the X? And everybody practices. Would you please pass the, and they fill in their word of choice. Pencil, pen, crayon, block, doll, you name it, and they fill it in. We find that those kinds of response frames are particularly helpful for children who are not as advanced in language, and are particularly helpful in children who are speakers of other languages to move into English. They provide a certain security, a certain anchor, so that children feel more comfortable testing the waters, attempting to use the language. So we facilitate conversations and discussions carefully, purposefully, intentionally, in addition to taking advantage of those opportunistic moments. And finally, in terms of instruction, we make sure that we are engaging children in stimulating learning activities and investigations across the curriculum. It's infused across the curriculum. Things are exciting and they're interesting and they prompt my curiosity, and I can't wait to get my hands on them and talk to my friends about them, because what I'm doing in every one of these different subject areas and all these different learning experiences are interesting to me, exciting, and they arouse my curiosity. And when we do that, when we ensure that all features of our instruction, with all the subject matter that we're addressing, with the standards for the NGSS, what learning experiences am I designing intentionally that are going to capture my students' interest, that are going to encourage their language, that are going to prompt me to use certain language with them. So again, I'm developing that language. I just share here what you already know about, and that is that there are 2 documents that inform the work of transitional kindergartners. Administrators, teachers, others should be well aware of both of these documents. Those preschool learning foundations lay out some standards, some foundations, some expectations, some competencies that most children can achieve given the kind of instruction and environment that we know is high quality for kids. And we move into those kindergarten standards. And there is an alignment document that you may have seen that has been put together that shows how, for example here, the language, foundations, and standards align with one another. In those first 2 columns, we see the preschool foundations, and in the 3rd column, we see kindergarten. Preschool is sorted by about 48 months, about 60 months, and then moving into at the end of kindergarten. So these documents are really worthwhile as you're beginning to think about, well, what kind of language do I want to focus on? What are the needs of my students? These documents help me observe children and think about where they are on that continuum. We're not going to look at these in detail, but I just want you to be aware, if you're not already, about this document and the kind of resource that it is for you. And then here too are the frameworks that were built that provide that guidance on implementation. So the expectations and competencies are in the foundations and the standards, but how we want this to occur, suggestions for implementation, visions of implementation, those you will see in the frameworks themselves. They're including vignettes and snapshots that are little classroom scenarios of how this teacher was using language, how this teacher was supporting language in this context, how this teacher helped children understand and appreciate routines of turn-taking in a conversation or building on others' ideas. So valuable resources there. Let's move on, though there is much more we could be saying about language. We started by saying language is the cornerstone of literacy. Here's what is crucial. Children need to become familiar with how language is represented in print. If language is the cornerstone of literacy, if language is what we read, tactily, visually, with assistive technology, however we choose, however is appropriate for us, however we choose to engage with that. Language is the cornerstone, but we need to understand how language is represented in print. Language is what is put on that page. How is it put on the page? How is it represented? And therefore, the next thing that we talk about here is foundational skills. We created 3 modules for the language and literacy, professional learning modules for transitional kindergarten. One is on the integrated nature of language and literacy. It lays a beautiful groundwork, if I can tell you that. And then we chose language for a second module, and we chose foundational skills for the third module. It is critical that children not only own language, have language, continue to expand language throughout the rest of their lives, but that they understand how we represent language in print. And the preschool foundations and the kindergarten standards, both of which guide transitional kindergarten, identify the strands of those foundational skills. What are the foundational skills? They are the skills that enable me to deal with the print that is on the page, to understand how print is being used. Both the preschool and the kindergarten foundation standards have concepts about print called also print concepts. It means essentially the same thing. How do we turn the pages on a book? How do we move our way down the pages of a book? Where's the front of the book? Where's the back of the book? What on the page is read? Is it the pictures? Is it these black marks on the page? That's basic concepts about print, and that is one of the things you simply need to know. I love picking up books from languages where text moves in a different direction, right? Where text moves from top to bottom, down in columns, or where pages are turned differently than we turn pages as English readers. It's fascinating to share that and realize how much we just take for granted that it's an automatic thing that we do, and in fact it's not. How do we do it? More on that shortly. We also have in both sets of the foundations and the standards of the foundational skill of phonological awareness. Ideally, you know, and all your administrators know, what phonological awareness is. And that's crucial because what we do in classrooms may not be obvious to others who are unfamiliar with this concept in terms of the critical nature that phonological plays. In fact, it is one of the most powerful predictors of current and future success in literacy. It is what enables us, in part, to become independent users of print. Phonological awareness is the awareness that oral language, that the speech stream consists of small units of sound. It is that shift away from meaning that we talked about for language development to the notion of the fact that the stream consists of little sounds. And we talk about those little sounds in terms of different size of units. Syllables, Hallie, Sheila, how many syllables are there? We also think about onsets and rhymes, like my last name is Yopp. Is the first part of that syllable. Op is the rhyme unit of that syllable, R-I-M-E, related to rhyme as R-H-Y-M-E. And then finally we move to the level of individual sounds. How many sounds are in the word dog, g, and so forth. So phonological awareness means that you have the insight, you have captured, you are able to manipulate and reflect on and think about, sounds that you hear in speech. That is a crucial skill. Another foundational skill is phonics and word recognition we talk about in kindergarten. In preschool foundations, we talk about alphabetics and print word recognition. Essentially that means, okay, I know what these symbols are, and I know how they work. I know what these symbols are, and I know how they work. In kindergarten, this is where basic sound symbol correspondences come in. In preschool, this is where alphabet knowledge is, just in terms of naming the letters. Naming the letters is part of print concepts for kindergarten, so those don't line up 100%, but the key ideas are there, and the critical concepts are laid out there. So this is important that kids learn, that young children learn. Eventually, how does it work? I want to put ideas down myself. How do I do it? Do I have to spend the rest of my life dictating to someone else? Or have I grasped how this code, how this symbol system works, so that I can use all my wonderful language, I can use my experiences, and I can put those down in writing. I can share my ideas too. That's crucial. And then finally, in kindergarten, we talk about fluency, and that's children becoming more and more skilled with developing the ability to rather readily read some words on the page, read some of those single syllable CVC, consonant, vowel, consonant words with fluidity, that they can do that rather readily, that they do so with purposefulness, and they recognize that they're trying to make meaning with it. And that's critical. It's not random reading of lists of words, but that in fact, I'm learning how to use these symbols, to engage with these symbols so that I can read words. I share on this slide a quote from a resource guide that we developed for the foundational skills, and it is, I think, important to consider, and that is, what is the goal of these skills? As I've been saying along the way, the goal is to rapidly and accurately recognize and decode printed words in meaningful, connected text, and to nearly effortlessly record ideas in print. These contribute to students' ability to independently engage with and use printed language for their own purposes. That's what's the important part here. We're working on students' independent ability to engage with print as consumers of it and as users of it for their own purposes, to find out more, to share ideas and so forth. That's the goal. That's where we're going. That's not going to happen for nearly all children in TK. But what we are doing is laying the impact. We will have a lasting impact on children's literacy achievement if we are attending to this now in ways that are appropriate for young children. So let's just have a couple more quotes here that I'll share with you from the research. We know that foundational skills should be taught early and well, so that every child has access to printed language. Every child has access. That early childhood is a critically important period for the acquisition of these skills and for attempts by adults, by the teachers, to alter the course of children's development to increase the probability of later academic success. So we mindfully address these. We address it early and well so that we can help put children on that trajectory toward independence, towards future possibilities, towards joy and empowerment. It is an empowering thing to do to help children figure out how the symbol system works. So how are we going to do that? Let's talk about, again, the notion of environments and instruction. So let's begin with those environments. Probably you have heard the discussions of let's create print-rich environments for kids. That is not something that is out of the norm of what teachers of young children do. Print-rich environments. So we've just listed here a few things, and we talk about them on the modules as well. Books and charts around the room, and in the language of the home, as well as in English, so that children who are users of another language at home They see the print that may be in their home, maybe in their newspapers, that may be on lists that are created, maybe in letters that have come in, certainly that is spoken, the home language as well as English. We have books, we have charts, we have labels, cubby labels, labels above sink that says wash hands carefully please, labels this way to the restroom, you know, any kind of label around the room, and importantly print prompts, not just in here's our literacy center. I always get nervous when people say, here's the literacy center in my classroom. The literacy center should be all over your classroom. Print prompts, materials to write with, labels, books, and the block center, Architectural Digest is there so kids can flip through and see different buildings. Right? That we have menus, we have all kinds of print throughout the room. There is no single literacy center. There might be a book reading center because it's where we've got our librarians, where we've got our nice little bean bags and so forth. But there is no literacy center. It is everywhere. It is part of every small group space that we have in our classrooms. Writing materials are part of that as well. Writing materials and models. Teachers who use writing purposefully for kids. Teachers who are recording in front of children the schedule for the day. Children who are recording from children their hopes for their classroom hamster and the materials they need to purchase or the environment they need to provide for it. That we are using writing, and I will forever be grateful to a teacher of my daughter when she was a young child, because that teacher, I'm sure on her own budget, provided lots of paper, lots of envelopes, lots of writing materials that children could use during the child-initiated time. And honest to goodness, every day my child probably brought home 4 to 5 envelopes stuffed with random strings of letters or eventually moving into messages. I've saved every one of them because it was such a treasure, but I've also thanked the teacher and then gave her some for her future classes of the same kinds of materials. Kids want to engage. Some kids just gravitate towards that. And what an exceptional environment to provide, that is a useful, valuable sort of thing to have in our classroom as kids are wrestling with how they want to convey their ideas. And finally, just that notion of purposeful use of print in multiple contexts for multiple reasons across the day throughout the curriculum, that kids are using print and teacher is modeling the use of print purposefully. I'm not just learning the alphabet because I think that's what TK is about. What do you do for literacy development in this classroom? Oh, I make sure they know the alphabet by the end of the year. Really? Is that how you are defining what we do here? Now I have to add, learning the alphabet is important because you need to understand the symbols that we use. But literacy in TK is vastly richer than learning that alphabet. And as we learn the alphabet, recognizing that it has a purpose. Oh, that's used in my name. There's the letter that I use in my name. Oh, I want to write this to my mom, and I see here's the letter that I would be using for that. So it's that notion that we have an environment where print plays an important, regular role in our day for meaningful purposes. It's not the flashing alphabet cards for 10 minutes in the corner and I can check that box. We could talk about that a lot. You know, I said that you probably thought about print-rich environments. You may not have thought as much about phonologically rich environments. We know phonemic awareness is important. We know kids need to be thinking about, be able to capture sounds, be able to notice the sounds that are part of the speech stream. So not only do we have print all around the room and as part of the environment, but we also make sure that throughout and across the day that we are engaging in phonological kinds of play, that there are multiple opportunities for that. What part of the repertoire of books we read are books that play with sounds, perhaps heavy use of rhyme, perhaps sound manipulation, perhaps goofy manipulations of sounds. The Hungry Thing asks for schmancakes. And when I read that book with young children, they all begin to get it. Schmancakes, no, schmancakes. He must mean pancakes. Books that play with sounds are an important part of the repertoire. They may not grow language development as much as we were talking about before. That's why we have to be mindful about the types of books we're using and the purposes we are using those books. We will share songs. Many songs play with sounds. Willoughby, Wallaby, Woo. You probably know that song. Many songs play with sounds, as sounds are substituted or manipulated. We make sure that our environment has lots of poetry. Much poetry is based on the use of rhyme, and so children begin to become aware of how the words sound in that poem, heightening their phonological awareness. There are many games that play with sounds as well that we can incorporate into our classroom that can be part of child-initiated play, teacher-facilitated play, and so forth. Critically, an important part of that environment, as before, was having adults who have warm relationships with children, ones in which they richly attend to and respond to children's own initiations to play with sounds. That a teacher is alert and she takes advantage of those moments as she's working through the classroom to comment on, giggle about, reflect on, consider, respond, and even further prompt children's play with sounds. That's a phonologically rich classroom. And we need teachers who provide all that print and comment on that print and engage with that print. We also need teachers who are singing goofy songs, who are reading books and commenting and laughing about how the hungry thing said schmancakes. Listen to that. He changed the first sound in the words. Instead of pancakes, he said schmancakes. We need administrators who walk into that room and think, oh, there's powerful learning occurring right now. Not, oh, you're just how cute. You're playing these cute little games with children. That in fact, they recognize the powerful learning that is occurring in those classrooms. So much to know, isn't there? We also, I just have to share these few quotes with you from the Preschool Learning Foundations and from other resources, because I've said that environment is important, and just as before when we were talking about language, it is more than establishing the environment. Although natural exposure to print has a positive influence on children's awareness of concepts about print, researchers have found that adults need to deliberately and actively encourage children's engagement with print by explicitly drawing their attention to print forms and functions. In other words, it does not happen automatically just because you put a bunch of books and charts in your room. Likewise, teachers do not assume that children learn the letters and their corresponding sounds simply through exposure. They provide systematic and thoughtful instruction and make explicit links with the print children see and use in the room and in their lives. And that's from the ELA ELD framework. Here's 2 more quotes on that. That phonological awareness does not develop naturally over time, but as a consequence of children's engagement with specific experiences, again from the preschool curriculum framework, Volume 1, and from the Developmentally Appropriate Practice document by NAEYC, children acquire foundational skills and phonological awareness when teachers purposefully support and provide assistance. So what is the point? The point is have a grand environment. Have a stimulating, print-rich, phonologically rich environment, but also we need to be mindful and purposeful about the kinds of learning experiences we are offering children. We need to think about this in terms of concepts about print, and this is probably the one that's most easily acquired because teachers do read big books and they sweep their hands across the page. They hold children nearby in those small groups and are turning the pages. So it's easy for children to rather quickly catch on to basic book handling. Here's the front of the book, here's the back of the book. I don't need to design a lot of deep, rich lessons to help you learn how to turn the page because I'm modeling it. So concepts about print comes rather readily through those rich experiences in the environment, especially as I'm talking about it. Oh, let's turn the page here. Who wants to turn the next page in the big book and let's see what happened now? It's phonological awareness that we need to be particularly intentional about, and it's alphabetics, which includes alphabet knowledge, letter sound correspondence, and basic understanding of the alphabetic principle that we also must be particularly intentional about. Those are the 2 big foundational skills that transitional kindergarten teachers need to be giving ample time to their planning and to their observations of children so they can in turn plan well for those. That what am I doing for phonological awareness? There are things we know, and these are discussed in the frameworks, the preschool one and the ELA-ELD framework for K-12. Well, guess what? We know from research that larger units of speech sound are more readily captured than smaller units. It's easier to segment by syllables. Hallie is easier to segment than an onset from a rhyme, and then certainly from phonemes. Right? It's more difficult to peel apart each individual phoneme in a spoken word. So as I'm designing instruction and I'm looking at materials and I'm thinking about the books I'm using and I'm thinking about the games, I'm thinking about the small group processes, I have that instructional sequence in my head. It's not just random. It's not just incidental. I also have the notion in my head that some sounds are easier to manipulate than others. For example, if a sound is a continuant, it is easier to hear it, manipulate it, think about it, reflect on it, because a continuant is a sound that can be stretched without distortion. For example, in the word man, there are 3 continuants. An. I can stretch and exaggerate those sounds without doing some major distortion to them. So as I'm working with a child, I know I'm going to want to start with words that have those continuants in them. It is much more difficult to exaggerate sounds that are non-continuants, like stops. For example, in the word top, you can't go you go t, ah, there's a continuant. We don't go pa, it's p. That's harder to grasp. So there are things we know about the developmental phonological awareness that we pay attention to as we're designing instruction and as we're thinking about where children are on that continuum and where we're going next. Same thing with letters of the alphabet. What do we know? We know if it's in your name, it's more readily learned. There is no one letter that we can say is best for all children because children have different names. Children have different experiences with print. Print that is in their name, letters in their names, letters in their environment are more likely to be grasped and learned more quickly. So I keep that in mind. And I also keep that in mind as I'm thinking about letter-sound correspondences. What are words that are going to be most relevant to me? What are words that are going to be most regular to me? I don't want to say, I read an alphabet book, for example, that says, I'm teaching, it's an alphabet book, it's about the Getty, and the first letter is A is for art. That's problematic because that's inconsistent with perhaps you teaching the short vowel sound on that. At any rate, there are things that we need to know, things that we need to think about in instruction. And these 2 documents, the foundations document and the standards document, provide the guidelines for us thinking about that continuum of learning. And here again, they are laid out. Here's the example from the alignment document. Here's the example of phonological awareness being laid out. What is the general progression and how do we move through that for children? And here are these 2 documents, also the frameworks that provide many examples and ideas for practice. They will guide us in our observations of children. They will guide us as we create activities and so forth. Final words. One is assessment. Given the importance of these skills, it's crucial that we are assessing children's progress. And those assessments will be both formal and informal. That we are looking in our interactions with children, but I'm also finding times to pull in one-on-one and engage with children so that I learn as much as I can about their progress in these foundational skills, as well as in language. And critically, that any data I gather is not just for the drawer, it's not just so I can check a box that I've done it, but it is because it is guiding me. It shapes what I do as the teacher in designing learning experiences for children. We're hoping that the transitional kindergarten professional learning models will be helpful to you, that they will inspire you, but that they will also reinforce and confirm so much of what you're already doing and thinking about with children, and that they will stimulate perhaps more conversations with your peers and with others so we can truly provide the very best for every single California child and beyond. And I will conclude by saying very best wishes in your work. I think, do we have time for questions? No time for questions, but you can email me anytime. I'm easy to find because not many people have the name Hallie Yopp. But I will tell you, we'll be right back after a quick break. Debra McMannis will be back here from the CDE. Thanks for joining us again.
Hello again. What inspiring speakers we've had this morning. Shifting gears, I'm going to provide a brief overview of ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which governs K-12 education. For the first time, early childhood and preschool are specifically mentioned in this K-12 federal legislation. And it's not just mentioned once, but it is repeated throughout the document. This sends a strong message to states and districts. These references to early education programs focus on improving transitions, enhancing quality, and improving coordination between local agencies and early childhood programs. ESSA explicitly states that providing early education programs is an allowable use of Title I funds and encourages planning for transition from programs to elementary schools. Congress also reiterated that Title I dollars can be used to support the learning and development of infants, toddlers, and preschoolers from low-income families. Congress added new important provisions that allow professional learning dollars to extend to pre-kindergarten teachers and federal dollars to support schools in adding pre-kindergarten. Districts are not obligated to use funding for early learning. If they do elect so, they must develop and describe the district strategy as part of their plan. State plans must include a description of how the district will support participating students' transition to local elementary schools. If a district elects to use Title I resources for early learning, the new law maintains the current law, which requires that the services comply with the education performance standards established by the Head Start Act. These standards were updated last year, and it was released the end of last year for the updated performance standards for Head Start. Regardless if Title I resources are used to support early learning initiatives, districts must undertake activities that increase coordination with early education programs. We know that it is the important growth and development that occurs before the first day of kindergarten. Districts must create and implement activities that increase coordination with early childhood programs. For example, developing and implementing a systemic procedure for receiving records, establishing channels of communication, conducting meetings with families and other programs, and organizing and participating in training related to the transition to elementary school. Professional learning is an allowable use of Title I funds and can be provided to district and local staff as well as stakeholders, including parents and family members. We encourage all teachers, leaders, and families of students P through third grade to train together and collaborate to support children's development. Title I is an opportunity for early childhood professionals and K-12 professionals to work together. Another area for districts to think about early learning is through dual language learner and Title III. We encourage districts to think holistically about how to support the continuum of all language development for their students. With the new opportunities under ESSA, schools can increase their focus on and support of early education. At the federal and state level, there is renewed focus on the importance of the early years, as you have heard today. The changing educational landscape provides an opportunity to improve and strengthen the P3 continuum. Transitional kindergarten provides an opportunity to accomplish this. California's S-Estate Plan is currently out for public comment. Check our website for opportunities to provide input, both electronically and through public meetings at many county Office of Educations throughout the state. And now I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Natalie Woods-Andrews to wrap up this webcast.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our presenters today. We're appreciative of your expertise and your contributions to this important work. A number of resources have been shared with you today. The Transitional Kindergarten Professional Learning modules shared in this presentation will be released this summer. These modules will serve as a valuable resource to administrators when planning opportunities for professional learning communities, as well as horizontal and vertical articulation at the school site or the district level. The modules may also be used for individual study by administrators or teachers. For transitional kindergarten teachers who are interested in obtaining early childhood or child development units, please note that continuing education units are available through UC Davis Extension. Also note that funds are available through the California Transitional Kindergarten Stipend Program to provide reimbursement for TK teachers for educational and professional learning expenses. Funds through the TK Stipend Project are available through March 31st, 2019. However, the funds are limited. For more information about the availability of these funds, please check with the local planning council in your county. Contact information for the LPCs is on the California Department of Education's website. Currently, the California Preschool Instructional Network, also referred to as CPIN, conducts in-person professional learning module sessions for TK teachers and administrators. While funding for these in-person sessions will end June 30th, 2017, CPIN leads will extend these opportunities through a fee-for-service option. If this is of interest, we encourage you to visit the CPIN website shown on this slide. Transitional kindergarten is a critical and unique opportunity to support the preschool through grade 12 continuum. It is our hope that you access these new resources that are available to support your work. This webcast will be archived and available for future professional learning opportunities. On behalf of the California Department of Education and the Sacramento County Office of Education, we thank the many partners who contributed to this work. And most importantly, we value the investment of your time and your commitment to providing high-quality transitional kindergarten programs. Thank you all for joining this webcast today.